Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 31. We are going to be talking about the movie from 2015, Krampus. It's our holiday episode. Next episode, we're going to be covering What We Do in the Shadows, the vampire comedy, I guess, from 2014.
Yeah, it's like basically Best in Show if Anne Rice wrote it.
I guess we don't have to do the episode now because that pretty much sums it up.
I didn't know it existed, and it was on somewhere. Like it might have been on Netflix or something like that, and I clicked on it and had no prep going into it and was so happy to have watched it.
It's a damn good movie.
Yeah.
Before we dig in too far, I want to go back and talk about the black metal episode that we just posted with our guest, Andy Connors, which was so fun to do. I thought it was a really solid episode. But I especially want to say, because we didn't say it during the episode, that Andy made a very epic 14-hour black metal playlist as a sort of a primer, sort of an education for our listeners.
It's so fun. We were like, hey, maybe you could do like a little top 10 list for our blog or whatever. And he's like, here is 14 hours of black metal.
And that playlist is called A Scary Thoughts, parentheses, mostly black metal mix. And 14 hours of satanic destruction. Highly recommended.
Yeah.
And of course, do listen to that episode. It's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, and it's a really like varied playlist too. It's just all over the place as far as black metal goes. It's very complete.
So shall we invoke our listeners to do our bidding?
Yes. If you're feeling especially kind and generous this holiday season, go over to iTunes and give us 5-star ratings. We're in the 70s. It would be very cool to get to 100 eventually. I don't know what that would do. Probably nothing, but it's just a little goal. It's good to have...
it would feel so good.
Yeah, it's good to have measurable goals.
And something else you can do is, and this is not something you could do for us, this is something you could do for yourself. Sign up for our newsletter at scarythoughts.org. Over on the right-hand side, enter your email address, and we keep our listeners and readers abreast of our episodes, and we make recommendations and send links and such. And a quick caveat about this episode before we get any further. Spoiler alert, this is not a review. This is talking about Krampus, the movie. You've seen it, and we're going to dissect it for you.
What a joy it is.
Okay, so what do you have to say about this to start?
It appears to be that there are a couple different Krampus movies. And I had seen a trailer for one that looked like hot garbage. So when you had recommended this, I was like, okay, whatever, it makes sense for Christmas. We did Gremlins last year. Let's do something current. And I didn't know anything about this version of it. The version of it I saw had more of like a traditional, like shaggy Krampus character as the lead. And like I didn't know until the credits were rolling that the guy who directed Trick or Treat directed this. And when I was watching it, I thought, man, this feels like the Christmas version of Trick or Treat. Like it's all happening.
It really does.
And to me, I'm not going to put that director up there with like a Kubrick or something like that. But I think when you can really feel a director's touch and there's things that are fun and interesting that you notice, that is definitely in the direction of being sort of an auteur. And I am extremely stoked to see his Godzilla movie when it comes out.
Oh, is that what's up?
Yeah, he's doing Godzilla.
Oh, fun. Because I thought it was funny. There's a moment in Krampus where Uncle, what's his name, says something disparaging about Omi, about the Easter Bunny. And it struck me as being a bit of an inside joke that Michael Dougherty, the director of this and Trick or Treat, has tackled these two holidays. Might as well be Easter bunnies next.
Yeah, we'll probably get into it a little bit later, but there's some conversation that this is a shared universe with Trick or Treat, and there's some things that were cut out of the theatrical release that really unite them together.
Oh, cool! I don't even know about that. So I'm excited to hear about that. But I mean, I think the greatest similarity between this and Trick or Treat, which we've covered on a previous episode, I recommend that movie and recommend our podcast about it, is that it's a holiday that has rules and breaking those rules is punishable by death. Mm-hmm. It's pretty simple. I mean, that's kind of the plot of Trick or Treat, and that's the plot of Krampus.
Yep.
I also kind of love that this is, how do I put this? This is a Christmas movie and feels like a Christmas movie. Mm-hmm. It's got a lot of the tropes and the nostalgic packaging of a Christmas movie, but it also has the trappings of a horror movie. Mm-hmm. And so it's not like, I don't know, Silent Night, Deadly Night, or some other sort of Christmas slasher. It really does feel like a holiday film with all these elements of horror thrown in.
Yeah, the director, Michael Dougherty, in a few interviews, he talks about how it's basically 3 movies. It's a black family comedy, it's a Christmas movie, and it's a horror movie. And I think those 3 elements are very well balanced in this. You know, like the things that are Christmas movie stuff, it really does look like a small town Christmas movie. It's basically a Christmas Vacation, National Lampoon Christmas Vacation.
Oh, yeah.
Like the uncle is basically the Randy Quaid character, and the house is kind of the fantasy all-American Christmas home where there's like, it's 2 stories, it's in this like beautiful neighborhood. And one of the things that's really fun about the neighborhood is when the camera pulls back and shows it, there's famous houses in the cityscape. Like one of the houses is Ferris Bueller's house.
No.
Yeah, there's all kinds of really fun little touches like this and that in this movie. And what I like about the Easter eggs that are in this film and the homages to other movies, like there's definitely like pieces of Gremlins in it. There's a lot going on, but they're not, in Michael Dougherty's fashion, they're not precise. They're not like a straight pickup where you're like, oh my God, there's the Millennium Falcon flying across, like in Poltergeist or even Stranger Things. It's its own movie, but it's using these tropes in interesting and subversive ways. Just like Trick or Treat adds subversion to everything that happens. You're like, okay, is this person going to be a vampire in Trick or Treat? Oh, actually, it's a werewolf.
Right.
You know, and that happens all throughout this movie, and it's super, super fun.
Yeah.
We didn't even really talk about with the movies. We kind of like skipped completely over like the main monster, which is the Krampus. Yeah. And so the Krampus comes from, he was a witch's god in pagan times and got kind of wrapped into the Christian Christmas myth. And one of the best things about this movie is Weta Workshop's creature effects. They're all practical. For the most part, they're all practical effects or cleaned up with CGI. And the way the monsters look in this movie, they're just great. They're really enjoyable.
Yeah, they all have a lot of character. They're almost all incredibly unique. I don't want to shit on this movie too quickly, but I loved everything about this movie except the gingerbread man. I appreciate that it's all almost practical effects, but that also really contributes to the sort of classic nostalgia-ness of it all, is that this movie definitely is going for a sort of Christmas story, retro, holiday cheer, and the practical effects definitely contributes to that.
Did you pick up kind of a Dawn of the Dead vibe from the opening sequence, the mall sequence?
Oh, for sure.
It doesn't connect so much to the rest of the movie, but it is a really fun opening sequence because there's all kinds of really goofy gags going on that if you don't pay attention or slow down, you really miss them. There's one scene where the guy has a ladder and then another ladder upside down on top of it. And he's like trying to reach these really top shelves. And it's just insanely dangerous. And it sets up this mall where it's just completely unbridled madcap capitalism. And I was kind of, when that opening sequence, it doesn't quite fit with the rest of the film because it doesn't have that sort of level of manicness. It kind of slows down into being a horror movie.
Yeah.
And I expected it to be more of like a traditional critique of Christmas, and I was so pleased that it isn't, because it's not playing a deconstruction game, it's playing a construction game. And I think that ties in with Michael Dougherty's use of rules. Like in Trick or Treat, he's not deconstructing Halloween, and then in Krampus he's not deconstructing Christmas, where you're getting we're going to subvert the paradigm of what St. Nicholas is. No, like you're getting another creature, and not only are you getting this traditional Nordic, Scandinavian, Germanic monster, you're getting all these extra pieces added to the mythology of that creature. And he's like building this entire new universe out of this stuff, and it's just so well done. Like, like Krampus doesn't have elves, like traditionally, but the idea that because Santa Claus has a bunch of crazy elves running around, Krampus is going to have a bunch of elves. And some of the design notes for the creatures, they talk about how they used to be Santa's elves and they just kind of went bad. And I love that because there's just such fun, terrifying, almost Troll 2 type creatures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
However, Krampus, the movie, is secular. It is not very Christian. It immerses us in this sense of traditional American family Christmas, but it's secular. There's no baby Jesus. There's a reference to the manger at the beginning, but that's where a fight took place. However, what it does is lean on other Christmas traditions. They're watching A Christmas Carol at one point. There's a reference to, are we going to watch Charlie Brown? And those two movies, well, story and movie, are about learning the meaning of Christmas, right? That's what A Christmas Carol is about, learning the meaning of Christmas. Same with the Charlie Brown Christmas special. And that's what this movie is about learning at threat of death, the meaning of Christmas. What is interesting in Krampus is the way it's subverted is that you can't be taught a lesson if the punishment is death, really. And if you don't know the rules first, right? So this movie is about us, the audience, reinforcing our understanding of the true meaning of Christmas. But the family, the Engels family in this movie can't learn the meaning of Christmas because it's too late, right?
Yeah,
you can't learn a lesson while you're stewing in hell.
Yeah, there is no salvation. There's no like deathbed conversion for these people to the true way of Christmas. And there's something that is fun about the comic book tie-in to this movie, like Trick or Treat. There was a comic book tie-in, and it is 3 different tales. And in the more of an EC Comics tradition, there are 3 different morality tales, but they all link back to Christmas in some way. The very first one is the Santa Claus from the mall scene in the beginning is like a Vietnam vet, and he gets stuck in the mall. So the comic book walks it out that it is not only happening just to this family on this street, but it's happening all over the town. Like apparently this entire town has been cursed by visits from the Krampus, which reminds me again of Trick or Treat, like how Trick or Treat feels like. Remember I said it could almost be like the Tempest? It's like this place that doesn't exist anywhere. And like you imagine if you get to the border of the town, it sort of disappears. And that's a little bit how this is. Like there is no real escape. The snow is too strong for them to escape at a certain point. So the comic, there's the tale of the Santa Claus Vietnam vet, and they kind of, in an Aliens sort of way, go to war with all of the Krampus's minions, and they kind of have a bit more success. And there is a redemption of some sort. And then there is a story about a cop who is looking for the man who ran over her sister a few previous Christmases. And there's a tale that kind of comes tied into that, which is the third tale, which is essentially a combination of A Wonderful Life and A Christmas Carol. It's about a rich man and this family, and he's not quite visited by the ghost of past, present, and future, but there is a bit of punishment for him being a rich twat. And the comic book has a lot more to say about ironic punishments and morality in a very like Tales from the Crypt kind of way than the film does. In the film, the little boy basically writes a note to Santa Claus, and he, in the face of opposition from his family and just hatred for his family, he not only does he turn away from his family, like he turns away from like the myth of Christmas. He's like, I hate you, Santa Claus, basically, and just tears up this note and throws it in the air. And that has invoked this monster to come and take them all. And the weird thing is his grandmother, Omi, has experienced this already in her life, and she tells no one what is going on. And she has kind of insider information. And at a certain point, you would think earlier she would be like, oh shit, the Krampus is coming.
Yeah. And just quietly saying, keep the fire hot, lest you be plunged into the pits of hell.
Right.
She could have been a little more emphatic about it. I think what's also interesting is that, like a lot of Christmas narratives, this is a redemption story, but it isn't a redemption story. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a way in which this movie, we could think of it like Saw, the Saw franchise. Like, you have a choice here. what's really important to you, and you're going to learn a lesson through this trial. Mm-hmm. But through the process of Krampus, it turns out there is no redemption. You can't be, once you've crossed the line, you're damned. Mm-hmm. Krampus and his minions are just going to torture you for a while, but it's a one-way ticket. So if it's an entire neighborhood in the comic book, but it definitely in the movie seems like the whole neighborhood is gone. Mm-hmm. This sort of reminds me of very valid criticisms of Christianity. Mm-hmm. Okay, you're born in some remote village in Asia where Christianity, it's impossible for it to touch you. Mm-hmm. It's impossible for you to come in contact with the Bible, so you're going to suffer eternal hellfire because you didn't believe Jesus Christ was your Lord and Savior. That's not a very fair metric to determine life everlasting, right? And in this movie, it seems like Omi, when she's a little girl, like this town is torn apart and starving. It's like it doesn't really roll out exactly what circumstances she was in. Mm-hmm. Possibly Austria or something in the 40s. Hard to say.
Yeah, hard to say.
But Krampus just destroys her town because she was bummed out about Christmas. We can sort of see like, in this affluent suburb, people have forgotten the meaning of Christmas and they're nattering at each other, and somehow that is enough for the entire neighborhood to just be wiped off the face of the earth. Mm-hmm. There is zero redemption. There's no second chance. It just seems completely unfair, which is a true horror, but it's in the guise of being a redemption narrative.
Yeah, well, I like how the tradition of Christmas is actually nested in this film. They've completely effaced the Christian tradition of Christmas. Yeah. It's not even there. And they have also forgotten the Norman Rockwell tradition of Christmas, although they go through those traditions. Like the mother keeps her mother's Christmas ornaments, and then she makes all the food a certain special way. And there's a tree that is decorated. The boy is in a nativity play. So they're playing the holiday Christmas out, but without any real belief. And what's kind of fun about that is it mirrors how a lot of people, they'll go to the candlelit mass at midnight on Christmas Eve. Like they just do it. They're paying lip service to it. So they're not paying lip service to a religious Christmas. They're paying lip service to a secular Christmas. But what comes for them is an even older tradition. And I think that that's what's so fun about this is the Krampus is really just the echoes of this pagan god that has come for them. And the actual Christmas traditions of the real world, the Krampus is sort of positioned as a secondary character to Santa Claus or Saint Nick. And then Santa Claus and Saint Nick are not necessarily the same person.
Right.
Like Saint Nick comes on December 4th and leaves you toys in your shoes. And then Santa Claus comes Christmas Eve and 24th. But they're also sort of the same thing, so these myths are very slippery. And then Santa Claus is also Odin from an even older tradition. Like a lot of the things that we associate with Santa Claus come to us from Norse mythology, like the 8 flying reindeer. The reason why there are 8 flying reindeer probably has something to do with Odin's horse having 8 legs and being able to fly. Uh-huh. And there's all this really interesting stuff. And the whole idea of the Christmas tree and having gifts under the Christmas tree and lights on the Christmas tree comes back to old sacrifices, which mirrors Odin hanging himself on Yggdrasil for 3 days to learn all knowledge and sacrificing an eye and all this stuff. And the Krampus in this isn't quite the devil Krampus, which is sort of a repurposed witch god. It's really more of like an inverted Santa Claus. He has a sleigh of reindeer, these monstrous reindeer. He has a sack that he takes toys out of that are monstrous, and he puts people in them to take them down to hell. And then one of the best parts of this character design is the face. It looks like he has skinned Santa Claus' face and has it on top of him. And at first you're like, oh, is this a shitty creature design? You're like, no, this is an amazing creature design. Yeah. And then I like that at that point there's almost like an H.P. Lovecraft element to it, that like there is this older belief system that you're going to be destroyed by that you don't even understand. Just fun.
Yeah. don't understand and doesn't seem to be native even to the land. It's like Omi brought it over.
Yeah.
You know, like it's almost like a virus or a meme. It carries forth through traditions. It's parasitic on these traditions that you don't even know what lurks behind these traditions these positive traditions that you're ignoring.
Yeah, one of the things I don't quite love about the expanded universes of the comic book is there is a little bit of an element of it being Omi's blood curse. Like she has brought it from the old country, and the fact that it spills out.
Oh, that's in there.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, not really, but like that's kind of like my idea of it is like she's experienced it. She was the last survivor in the way that, like in Natural Born Killers, they leave one survivor behind. Like she's almost like the one survivor behind in order to continue tell the tale. But she's mum on it. She doesn't tell it. So she doesn't spread the fear of the Krampus. She doesn't bring it back. And, you know, it stays bottled up until it comes out and destroys this whole town. And then at the very end, you know, when all the characters have woken up the next morning, they're like, oh, did this happen? And then the reveal is it kind of did happen. And it pulls away and there's all the different little snow globes. And you realize, oh, this has happened countless times. That's one of my favorite touches of the movie. But at the very end, when the monsters all jump out again, it's so Muppets. That's
what I have in my notes. Muppet
weird.
Show. It really is. I didn't get that choice. Max even says, I just want Christmas like it used to be, sort of referring to these traditions. But these traditions are myths, right? I mean, you were even sort of talking about these different myths and how they morph. And I think that is the thing of Christmas is Christmas traditions are tied to nostalgia. They always are, because we have these expectations of how it's supposed to be, and it kind of never is. And it functions exactly like how nostalgia functions. We're always reaching back to something that never was, maybe the innocence of our childhood, the excitement we had when we were believing the lies of Santa, right? And that's what he wants. He wants Christmas to be like it used to be. But the thing is, once you know you can't go back, and that is the problem with knowledge, is that you can't unknow something. Once you've seen Krampus, once you have crossed that threshold, you can't not know about it. And I think that kind of ties into the end where you think, oh, it was all a dream. Well, no, it's not. You can't undo what you already know to be the case, which is if you want this mythology, this fabrication, this false nostalgia about the perfect family Christmas, you're buying into a lie and you're trapped by that lie.
Yeah. There's
forever.
There's another element to it that is maybe just me reading into it that you, in some ways you could think about the Krampus being sort of an Old Testament version of religion, and the shiny Christmas that they all want to believe in as sort of like a New Testament version of like a theology. And you don't get the new without the old. You know, and so you have, okay, he wants Santa Claus, he wants this fun thing that makes everybody get along, but that fun thing that makes everybody get along only exists because there's this older punishing God. Right. And I love that, like at the very end, the little kid is basically like, I take it back. And in most movies, they would let the child walk away.
Right. That's the redemption.
Yeah, that's the redemption. And this one, he just gets straight up dropped into hell. Yeah. Which I think is just such a great... I'm even going to go out as far as call it a brave ending for a director.
Sure.
Like, I mean, because that was one of the things we talked about in Trick or Treat, which we keep referring to, I guess. Like, when have you seen a bunch of kids killed in a movie?
Right.
Now in Krampus, you know, like in grotesque ways.
Although in Krampus, I feel like there's an element to Krampus that didn't fully know what it wanted to be. I mean, it is many things, and to its credit, it does a lot of different things really well. Like when it's funny, it's pretty funny. When it's heartwarming, it's pretty heartwarming. When it's horrifying, it's pretty fucking scary. But you never really see anybody die. You see a body get swallowed by a big serpenty beast, and you see the kid
clown.
and you see the kid get dropped into hell, Max. But you don't see really any serious violence, not really.
Yeah.
And all the visible violence is fairly cartoonish.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of trying to be family friendly, but it's not with an ending like that.
Yeah, and I think that level of violence is a product of them aiming to be a PG-13 movie.
Yeah.
And a lot of times a movie is aimed to be PG-13 because they want to have like a broader audience, and so they make these sacrifices. Like imagine if Deadpool had been a PG-13 movie. Like you'd imagine it could have easily been just awful.
Yeah.
And it is awful, but everybody loves it, and I think it's just it's so mediocre.
Okay.
I mean, and then
I'm not going to defend it.
Yeah. it to me, Deadpool is where the bottom should be for those movies.
Oh, yes.
You know, that's kind of what
disagreement.
I mean. Like, it's like, yes, it's okay. And if that was the low end, things would be great. And I think Logan is slightly better than that because Logan's just a slightly better constructed movie.
Yeah.
But that's, we don't have a superhero movie show, thank God. Even though I've threatened it before.
Yeah.
What I like about, though, Michael Dougherty's reasoning to make it a PG-13 movie is he wanted 13-year-olds to be able to see this movie. And he's talking about the kind of 13-year-olds that we were. Like a VHS-obsessed, horror movie-obsessed, comic book collecting, heavy metal listening 13-year-old. So he didn't make it for like a wider theatrical release market. He made it so a certain type of 13-year-old could see and enjoy this movie. And I think that is why, even the violence being cartoonish and probably unsatisfying to a horror fan, I think it keeps a certain charm to this movie, and it doesn't really neuter it. Like, it could be a neutered PG-13 versus sort of like a crafted to be PG-13 sort of deal.
Sure.
Yeah.
I want to go back and, I was talking about the mythology of the perfect family Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
But what did you think of the family itself, and especially the extended family? Because Max has he poses the question about why do we have to spend Christmas with them? And there's not really a good answer. And I think that is a fair question. That's always a fair question, especially when we live in this world where people are spread further and further from their families, and reasons for tolerating one's family are diminishing. And I think that especially right now, people are having harder and harder times crossing boundaries with their families, because as we become further spread across the planet and getting physical distance in a time when, especially this country is so divided, people are becoming increasingly divided from their own family, and having to really confront that question. And I mean, to that issue, I think that this movie is I could almost imagine Michael Dougherty being thankful he didn't try to make it right now, because the aunt and uncle, you could not have them not say something about Donald Trump, and then it would just sort of ruin the movie. It would be like the reality of those characters right now would be just a little too harsh. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I'll go out on a limb here and say I think a lot of that division is completely manufactured. I think people are infected by these ideology viruses that actually get in the way of what's actually important, which is your family. And you should be able to enjoy your crazy uncle who has a Hummer and it's like totally ridiculous and he has a shotgun in it, which is funny because like one of the things that just struck me as odd is that the crazy survivalist gun-toting uncle makes fun of the other guy for being an Eagle Scout.
That made no sense.
It makes no sense because that dude would be stoked on him being an Eagle Scout.
Yeah.
Because to me, if I could go back in time and have done something to become better prepared for the apocalypse, it would have been to be an Eagle Scout. I mean, you learn how to shoot and all, like all this stuff. The family dynamic of this movie, to me, is just completely ripped off from National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
Yeah.
I mean, even though, the Rube family showing up in a gigantic monstrous vehicle and bringing along this unwelcome aunt who's actually kind of one of the more fun characters in the movie. Do you wonder, like, why would she even have wanted to come? I think one of the things that this movie does better than a lot of movies is there is character development. Like all these characters change slightly as the movie goes on a little bit, and you learn about them in interesting ways. Like, the uncle, kind of comes around to his brother-in-law, that he's an okay guy, and they sort of learn to respect each other's attitudes towards parenting or something like that. But back to the division thing, like, I don't know, man, like just almost like looking for there to be division like that, I think causes it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's fair. The guys on Double Toasted, I'm going to agree with something that they brought up is I think one of the faults of this movie is that they made that family just too detestable, just a little too one-dimensional, just a little too easy. And this movie isn't quite enough of a comedy for the caricatures to work. I think this is partly what I was saying earlier about that this movie tries to be many things, is that other family is the butt of every joke or condescension that even we, the audience, perceive, but it makes them very flat, which would work if it was like an outright comedy. But it's not. It's mostly actually like this heartwarming family story. And so why would I want to warm up to that side of the family? And it seems, unless I missed some things, pretty much everything that happens with that extended family, everything they say, everything they do is detestable, except when it comes to family. Understanding each other as a family, gotta protect your flock. Like these ideas about family are their only redeeming qualities, but otherwise they're just sort of these caricatures of flyover state rubes.
Yeah, I think it's a total weakness, and honestly, it's systemic to Hollywood. Like Hollywood has absolute disdain for Middle America and rural communities and stuff like that. And I'm from the South, so I'm sensitive to it. But I've also spent a lot of time on West Coast farms and been around a lot of rural environments. And if shit goes crazy, I do not want a fucking Berkeley English Lit PhD having my back. I want a dude with a Humvee and a shotgun.
The guy with the Humvee and the shotgun. Here's another weird construction fault is Uncle Howard points his gun at his brother-in-law and doesn't pull it away and apologize. I think was just a little too weird.
Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, it's not like he has like a violent urges towards this guy. There's a little bit of a class warfare thing they set up where the Rubish family thinks that, oh, this other family, they're like too good for them, or they make weird food or whatever. And I've definitely been down the, oh, you guys make weird food route with my family. Yeah, it's just unbalanced a little bit. Like, why are these two semi-androgynous girls like wrestlers? What is that even about? It doesn't even make any sense. And they have the one kid. There's almost like 2 or 3 kids too many in this movie.
Yeah.
But I think that like menagerie of children is sort of a nod to Home Alone. Like where you get a little bit lost in the number of kids running around.
Right.
And then there's always, or even A Christmas Story, where each young kid has a totally different weird look. But Christmas Story has a long enough time to walk out. Like, Scott Farkus, the bully. He's got red hair and he's creepy. And then there's the other kid who's just sort of slow. And the younger brother who is a half-wit. Like, you get those personalities a little bit. And I think, movies where there are kids and adults, I think sort of need to choose whether or not they're going to have the story told from the children's perspective or the parents' perspective. And I think that is a thing that could have made this movie stronger, is that they had chosen it to explore it from the children's perspective.
True. I think that another issue that this film has is a sort of one of pace and tone that, again, it could maybe get away with this sort of thing if it was more of a comedy, but the Engels are not acting like a family whose daughter just disappeared and they heard screaming for her life in the background. Everybody's sort of clearly agitated and worried, but that family did not just lose their daughter screaming in the distance. And then the other family's son gets dragged up the chimney. And then like a scene later, everybody's pretty calm. Like they're agitated and concerned and wanting to do something. But the genuine hysterical panic fury that would take over that house at the very outset is totally lacking. And then that also plays itself out in this podcast. I often bring up this issue of villainous trifling, when the bad guy doesn't just off people, when there's too much dabbling. But that goes both ways in this movie. There's always these weird lag times. Like when Aunt Linda says, "Give me back my kids, you fudger." She could have tried to save her kid instead of pausing and delivering that funny line. Like she actually lost her kid because she was too busy posturing. There are so many times when the toys or the elves are coming for you, and there are these weird lag times that give too much empty choreography.
Yeah,
that make the action sort of lag.
Yeah, and I think we've just seen so many intense, action-driven movies where the violence has consequences both emotionally and physically. For instance, Green Room, which we talked about on our previous episode, and also did an episode on. Everything that happens in Green Room has an emotional effect on the characters and their tiny little space. And in some ways, it's a similar setup. There's a tight family type unit in a spot being assailed from the outside by a
siege movie.
Yeah, it's a siege movie, just like this is. And, those characters, they respond accordingly. These characters, their emotions are so all over the place.
Yeah.
So, but I do have a retcon for this.
Okay.
What if this is one of the methods of death that appeases the elder gods in Cabin in the Woods? And they have chosen Christmas as the mechanism to kill this family. And then all this unevenness has, an engineering effect. And this is totally not in it at all. But I guess what I'm getting at is, what if the environment of the mythology is what's causing this unevenness of behavior in these characters? Because in the very beginning, the Christmas season has driven the town mad in the opening.
That's pretty good.
It's a stretch, but
I like that.
Yeah.
It's very Gen X YouTube
yeah.
fan theory.
Yeah, it's which I usually don't traffic in fan theory, but I in this particular one, I was like, oh, this would be kind of fun.
That's pretty good.
But which brings me into the idea of shared universes, and this movie is not explicitly a shared universe. Well, I guess it is actually, with the deleted scene, is an explicitly shared.
What is it?
There's a scene where Max comes downstairs with a box of candy. It's his Halloween candy. He goes, "Hey, do you guys want any candy?" And it's after the sisters disappeared and they're trying to keep the flame high. He opens up the box and Sam's lollipop is in the box. And
why would they cut that out?
Who knows? I don't know. And then the director himself says he likes the idea that each of these self-contained worlds are sort of overseen by an ancient pagan god. And that's basically what Sam is an ancient Halloween god. Yeah. And, the Krampus is this ancient Christmas god. And these worlds are sort of united by that scene. And it's also united to other film Christmases. And when you pull out at the very end and all the snow globes, one of the snow globes is the Bates Motel. And Psycho is a Christmas movie. A lot of people don't remember. It takes place a few days before Christmas.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Yeah. And so you have Psycho, Trick or Treat, Krampus all kind of mingling together. So why not bring in all these other mythologies?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
This is completely random and just maybe petty.
Mm-hmm.
There are two tropes that this movie crosses that drove me fucking crazy.
Mm-hmm.
One is the infinite cartridge shotgun that just never seems to run out of firepower. I don't understand why we're still...
This is it's an example of liberal writing, like liberals who have no idea how guns work, and they just and I'm saying that, of course, to be provocative and funny, but I have an example of the opposite to talk about in a second.
Okay, the other is that's not how nail guns work.
Yes, that is absolutely,
which is maybe
correct.
A liberal misunderstanding of manual labor. Nail guns need compressed air and have to be pushed up against something. That's how they work. But have you ever seen a nail gun in a movie that doesn't just kind of fire like a handgun?
Yeah,
No.
and the thing about it that's so weird is it's terrifying enough to have the nail gun pressed against you and pulled by a little creature. So why not have it work effectively? Like, why not? Why take this weird, stupid move? And I mean, it's just weird to me.
Actually, that's a trope that crosses over into, we covered American Psycho recently, is there's a moment where he walks up behind his victim with a nail gun in his hand and doesn't use it. And it was almost hey, wait a minute. Nail guns need compressed air. That's not going to work, but he doesn't use it. Mm-hmm. So anyway, it's in his head. It's not in his head.
Yeah, like it's an interesting thing. Is like in his head, is it hooked up? Like, does it work in his head in the way that dropping the chainsaw from the upper stories works in his head? He's simply drawn it in his little day planner, and he wants it to happen that way. But the infinite gun, the infinite bullet thing is just absolutely ridiculous. And it's always, to me, such a miss. I mean, you see it in the news when people are like, it's a Glock with a clip. And you're like, no, they have magazines. Like, if we have to get everybody's every proclivity a person has in their life absolutely correct, why can't we get, like, technical details correct, too?
Right.
And it's like things like...
that was brought up in Green Room, too. They're not bullets. They're cartridges.
Right. And so that's exactly what I was going to mention, is that movie goes out of its way to ground a thing, and one of the things that's interesting about Green Room is there's a tension that they only have so many shots left, and that adds to the fear of what's going on. Same thing in Cormac McCarthy's The Road. He has 2 bullets, one for him, one for his son, and he has to decide, maybe he shoots someone to save his son, and then he doesn't have a bullet for himself. So that's a thing that is played out over and over. Too heavy for Krampus, right? And the Boy Scout dad running around like he shoots like 100 bullets. I get it used to not matter in the 80s. Rambo just unloaded. Nobody cares about that. But I just feel like people could get it right. I don't know.
It wouldn't take much.
It wouldn't take much. It wouldn't take much at all.
And also, it's that issue that on a greater scale is, I think, the failure of all superhero movies is that if there are no stakes, there's no tension. Mm-hmm. If anytime you see someone in a Hollywood movie with a gun, they're just going to shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot. There's no tension. They're always going to be armed. Mm-hmm. Whereas if we live in a Hollywood where there are only so many shots available to a given character, that means they either have to use them wisely or they're going to fuck up because they didn't think about it in advance.
Mm-hmm. Although, then there's the idea, which I like that you brought up American Psycho, because I didn't even think about this, but they're in a fantasy environment. They're already in the snow globe, which is like a simulacrum of, a holiday world. So why wouldn't the 80s also be simulated? Maybe he's intentionally playing with that trope where, like, of course it's infinity bullets because it's the 80s inside the snow globe. I mean, it's generous, but generous to his thing, but or it could just be, weird editing, and you never know what gets cut out either. Like they cut out the candy cane. They could have cut out, the uncle coming in and being like, here's a box of 1,000 rounds. This is what I got you for Christmas. And he's like, what am I going to do with this? And then later on, so you never know. Which was your favorite toy, evil toy?
I think the angel, the flying, biting thing was pretty good.
Yeah, it's a pretty creepy looking. I thought the little robot, the design of the killer robot was pretty badass.
Yeah.
And then I love that if you go on YouTube, you can see like an entire 12-minute little mini doc about the Weta Workshop and how they created all these creatures. And the little robot is like a 3-person operating creature. And one of the things that makes this movie fun is you get the actor's reaction to these things. And I feel like if this was just a CGI monstrosity, like Transformers or X-Men or something like that, there's always a weird... It just doesn't feel right when actors are just looking at a green environment, like yelling at where a dragon is supposed to be, versus interacting with like a weird little puppet. It's like they make proper eye contact with the creature. Yeah. Or I think that's one of the things that's really fun. Another thing I like is this movie does a pretty good job of using the environment to do exposition. Like when they go out into the snow and they're looking inside the snowplow crab, and they have that conversation about, something has come in through the front of the truck.
Yeah.
Right? And which is weird because, like, where did the guy go?
It would have to be pulled back out.
Yeah, you would have to be pulled out. But what that is setting you up for is later on when you see the toys and they've been busted open, like that scene has told you that there's a direction that matters. And then you're like, oh shit, stuff escaped from these toy boxes.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Speaking more about just design and practical effects, I really did love Omi's childhood reminiscences. Speaking more about the way practical effects evoke nostalgia, but it goes even one step further by having Omi's childhood recollections feel more like a Rankin Bass stop motion animation.
Totally. Yeah.
But it also reminds me, you're not a Community watcher, are you?
No, I don't watch, except for my neighborhood watch at night when I'm in the Community.
When you're at the turret with your rifle, protecting the flaming garbage cans.
Yeah.
Well, there's a very special Christmas episode in which one of the characters goes into his head, into his fantasy land, and it's all done exactly like that. But it's all a fantasy, and everybody plays along. And it made me wonder about Omi's childhood. Is it a fantasy? Is it a fiction that she's sort of created? She's storytelling, and we're seeing all this evidence of some truth to it, but we don't know what her backstory actually is. So there might be a secondary reason for it being in this completely other mode.
And I think there's in the film evidence of that. Like there's a moment where the weird aunt is like, says something like, "What are you, Jews?"
Right.
And the reactions of the characters in it, it's spotlighted. It's sort of like has like a record skip feel to it. And it made me think about, okay, Omi from the old country, German, not necessarily, like a Nazi German. She could have been Jewish, and the Krampus coming to kill this town could have easily been some sort of metaphor for like concentration camps or something like that. And she's the only survivor. Yep. And she's quiet about it because she doesn't want to talk about it. And there's like this ancient blood and soil creature has come. Although historically the Krampus was banned by the Nazi Party because it was an invention of social democrats, which it's pretty funny. Like the Nazis would be against Krampus.
So let's talk about collective dread. What, if anything, in this movie connects to anything happening culturally right now? Like, why Krampus, the movie, why now? I kind of can only think of two things. One is that, like, we're fucking bananas for nostalgia and love uncovering new ways to discover old texts and recontextualize them. So like, oh my God, another demon, that we can exploit as a property, which is, it's a fun gesture, and nostalgia sells for sure. And I'm not saying that Michael Dougherty was out to sell, but I mean, that shit works right now really well. But I also do sort of see that the thing of Christmas movies, how they're almost always about reaffirming tradition and reaffirming family. Like even when they're comedies, they're about that. They're reaffirming family in some way. And I think even if it's not a horror film, it gives us a moment to reflect and feel guilty perhaps about how we feel about our families and how we, and how you really should call your mother. When was the last time you called your mother? Holiday films do that to us.
Right.
And when it's a horror film where not honoring that is punishable by death, it really drives that home. And I wonder if that is partly what drives this movie now.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a nostalgia thing going on. And I think if you were to look for where's the dread with that nostalgia, I just read this really stupid article in Huffington Post about how millennials are so broke and all this shit. And I think there's probably an argument that like, oh, that type of Christmas, the mainline Christmas in the film where there's a big house and a tree and people come to visit you, people who have decided that they can't have it, they've given up the locus of control in their own life, that sort of Christmas it's not even that they mourn it, but they like sort of have a hatred for it. Like once Frodo gets the ring in Lord of the Rings, Gollum sort of hates the ring, even though he really wants it to. And I think there's probably an economic feeling where you sort of hate that type of Christmas, even though you really want it. Maybe. I don't know. That article was so stupid. It was written by a dude who was like he'd gone to undergrad for an economics degree. And then he wrote this whole story about like, oh, people can't get ahead because they're saddled with student debt and car leases. And you're like, right, don't get student debt and car leases if you want to have like that sort of like traditional life. Like that wasn't a thing for these older generation. I don't know. That's just my high horse of, bootstrap economics, which is totally misguided, I guess. But even people who I think are doing well, they don't have these types of Christmases if they live on coasts. Like my house costs twice as much as my parents' house did, and it's a third the size of it. Like I'm not having a big old family Christmas. I have 2 people come over and spend the night, and it's terrible. Yeah. I mean, when's the last time you've been to a big family event like that?
Oh, I mean, I think part of all this is, the baby boomers got these big houses, but then they all eventually got divorced, and all their kids moved to all corners of the world. So these opportunities are slimmer and slimmer.
Yeah.
No, it's been since childhood.
Yeah. It's funny too, is like we think of that Christmas, that type of thing as the good old day, or some people think of it as the good old days, this like sanctified Rockwellian event. But it's really a short window that it happened. I mean, it basically like post-World War II to maybe the early 70s, if you want to count like the prosperous times. We're talking like 35 years out of even America's 250-something years of existence. Like that window of that world, the 2-car garage and the mom working at home, it was barely a blank. And
it was a very limited number of people for a very short period of time.
Yeah.
And we're still paying the price.
Yeah. I mean, and like I've been reading all these really old books lately, right? And just real poverty was everywhere. Like you would freeze to death frequently, or somebody would die of consumption or get tuberculosis, like that shit before, I guess, World War II and now returning, which is interesting, which I blame anti-vaxxers for, like the return of all these ancient diseases.
Ditto.
Yeah. But in a way, that lifestyle is the little bubble that's in the snow globe. Like that sort of Christmas, it is contained. It isn't real. It wasn't real. And there was a cost to be paid for it.
Maybe let's talk about how Max is a final girl who thinks he's in a Christmas story, but it turns out he's in No Exit.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely in No Exit, which is, once again, back like American Psycho. Like, what's going on here? Like, American Psycho really does map onto this movie a lot. Like the mad catness increases as it keeps going. Like, like American Psycho has infinite bullets at one point.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's I don't know.
It's a good double feature.
Yeah. Maybe not. What's your favorite straight up Christmas movie? What's a Christmas movie?
I love A Christmas Story.
Yeah,
I watch it every year. I still do. I think there's so much special about it. I love that it's the same filmmaker who made Black Christmas, which is an incredible movie.
Yeah.
A significant movie. Every time I watch Christmas Story, I get something out of it. I always laugh.
Yeah,
I'm smiling just thinking about it.
I don't know that I've ever seen it credits to credits, but I know I have seen it all the way through because, the way it plays over and over and over on Christmas. It's such an interesting movie because, like you said, every time I watch it, I see something I didn't see before. Like, and often the set decoration is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Like, I always notice like a weird butter dish that the person had, or there's something in it. It's just it's just really well crafted.
Let's fade to black and roll the credits.
Yeah. All right. Ho, ho, ho.
Thanks for joining us. Happy holidays and Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas. The war on Christmas is over, fuckers. You guys have lost.
See you next time for What We Do in the Shadows. Thanks for listening.
Later. But I completely lost my train of thought. What were we talking about?